been interesting times, today's stories. Taiwan remembers 30 years after Tiananmen crackdown. DDay switchboard girl has one last message. German industry blasts the CDU coalition government. India's Mount Everest of garbage is set to outgrow the Taj Mahal. John Kerry says countries are not doing enough on climate change. The World Organization for Animal Health says the African swine fever is an endemic disease. Rural Afghans bear the brutal cost of the endless war. The Zambian president encourages health drive by taking up jogging. Plus, Pinoys celebrate the first Filipino Heritage Month in Canada. Hello everyone, I am Sarah Nachman bringing you stories from around the globe. And this is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. Hundreds of Taiwanese marked the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen crackdown in an unusually large commemoration Tuesday that heard from witnesses, including rare testimony from a Chinese soldier. Taiwan's commemoration has long been dwarfed by much larger one in Hong Kong, but this year's anniversary enticed larger crowds than usual in Taipei's Liberty Square. Li Xiaoming, a junior officer in China's military during the protest who now lives in Australia, found his voice cracking as he addressed the crowd and called on his comrades to say what happened. He said, quote, "Today I speak out about history and I stand up because I hope more people will not forget what happened on June 4, and I hope more soldiers will rise up," he said. Li has previously said he never fired his weapon during the deadly crackdown on June 4, 1989, because his commander kept his regiment back. But he heard the gunfire erupt, and he felt racked with guilt ever since he arrived on the square a day later.
是一种惭愧吧。我觉得作为一个军官，中国人民解放军。在那时扮演是一种很耻辱的角色，是一种凶手的角色，所以我代表我个人或所有的前军官有良心军官，我再次表示我的内心忏悔。
While a handful of Tiananmen witnesses escaped overseas to tell their stories in the last 3 decades, very little testimony has been heard from China's military.
这些真相是应该要传承下去的，因为现在越来越多年轻人觉得这件事情太久了，然后觉得不关自己的事情。可是我认为不应该这样子，我认为这是历史的事实，我们更应该要让更多人知道。
The commemoration in Taipei comes as relations between Taiwan and China plummet and the island gears up for a presidential election in January. China has significantly stepped up diplomatic, military, and economic pressure on Taiwan since the Beijing skeptic President Tsai Ing-wen won a landslide in 2016. Marie Scott vividly recalls the horrifying sound of D-Day as she relayed orders down the line to the troops storming the Normandy beaches. She was only 17 and one of 9 women transmitting critical messages back and forth between communications headquarters in England and the fighting in France as the Allied invasion to liberate Western Europe began. 75 years ago, on June 6, 1944, the wartime switchboard operator who heard men charging at the Nazi enemy is now a 92-year-old living a quiet life in southwest London flat.
The most vivid memory I have of that day is on the first occasion when they lifted their lever to send their response. I could hear battles, gunfire, loud gunfire, and I knew those men were in a war. They were fighting for their lives. And suddenly, you know, you're hit with the reality of war.
Scott said she grew up on that day. Scott reminisced on how her life took a dramatic turn. Raised in South London, she started work as a manual telephone switchboard operator at 16, passing rigorous training. In March 1944, age 17, she volunteered for the Women's Royal Naval Service. After 2 weeks retraining, she was posted to Fort Southwick in Portsmouth on the southern English coast. Dug into the hillside, its labyrinth of tunnels was the communications nerve center for Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy. A month before the assault, Scott began special training on the VHF radio she used on June 6. On D-Day, 3 operators, each from the Army, Navy, and Air Force, sat in a row, working the switchboard linking comms HQ and the front line across the sea.
There was a sense of excitement back at the fort, but also a sense of apprehension. Will they succeed? You know, what will be the cost of the operation in lives, men being maimed? The whole thing, you know, was fluid. It was sort of changing all the time. But it was a very momentous day, and I'm just so honoured that I was, you know, part of it. And that this, you know, being a non-combatant, I didn't feel that my role was that important. But clearly the French saw the importance of communications, and therefore they said yes. So I can't tell you how proud I am, immensely proud. I'm receiving it for all the people in Fort Southwick that day who were working with me, or not necessarily with me, doing other things to facilitate Operation Overlord.
Now, Scott has been awarded the Legion of Honor, France's highest order of merit, and will be invested into the order on Wednesday, June 5, 2019, the day before the 70th anniversary of the D-Day landings.
And wars, I think, are brought about because people forget their humanity. So a little more of that would not come amiss.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel suffered a broadside from a powerful industry federation on Tuesday, adding to the woes of her coalition government already mired in crisis. Dieter Kempf, head of the Federation of German Industry, BDI, told a Berlin conference the Grand Coalition of Merkel's conservative CDU and the center-left SPD has gambled away a large share of the trust placed in it. Kempf said instead of action, the government sued for faint-hearted implementation of piecemeal social policies and an unhealthy level of redistribution. He pointed to last month's European elections, which saw the 2 traditional mass parties punished by voters, and the rise of environmentalist Greens, who doubled their shares from the last EU polls to just over 20%.
Mit vielen ihrer Themen erreicht die Große Koalition große Teile der Bevölkerung nicht oder nicht mehr. Die Koalition, lassen Sie mich das so deutlich sagen, hat einen großen Teil des in sie gesetzten Vertrauens verspielt.
While the BDI boss repeated long-standing calls for tax cuts to increase German competitiveness, he said companies are waiting for answers, especially on climate policy. Successive Merkel governments have struggled to balance a planned withdrawal from nuclear power by 2022, with winding down the use of fossil fuels like coal and building up a new electricity infrastructure. Merkel, in office since 2005, is battling to hold her coalition together after SPD leader André Nahles unexpectedly quit on Sunday, opening questions over whether the center-left will continue propping up the chancellor. But Germany's leader did not shrink from firing a salvo of her own back at the car industry as she followed Kempf at the podium.
Ich will noch mal darauf hinweisen, dass diese Bundesregierung jetzt 1 Jahr und 3 Monate im Amt ist. Ich könnte jetzt darüber sprechen, wie viele Stunden dieser 1 Jahres und 3 Monate ich damit verbracht habe, mich mit dem Vertrauensverlust der deutschen Automobilindustrie auseinanderzusetzen und den Regelverletzungen. Das will ich jetzt hier nicht tun. Ich will nur sagen, wir haben eine gemeinsame Verantwortung. Und diese gemeinsame Verantwortung muss bedeuten, dass soziale Marktwirtschaft weiter akzeptiert bleibt in Deutschland. Und dass wir damit auch die Möglichkeiten haben, die Menschen mitzunehmen. Und soziale Marktwirtschaft
India's tallest rubbish mountain in New Delhi is on course to rise higher than the Taj Mahal in the next year, becoming a feted symbol of what the UN considers the world's most polluted capital. Hawks and other birds of prey hover around the towering Ghazipur landfill on the eastern fringe of New Delhi. Stray cows, dogs, and rats wander at will over the huge expanse of smoking filth. Taking up the area of more than 40 football pitches, Ghazipur rises by nearly 10 meters a year, with no end in sight to its foul-smelling growth. According to East Delhi's Superintendent Engineer Arun Kumar, it is already more than 65 meters or 213 feet high. At its current rate of growth, it will be taller than iconic Taj in Agra, some 73 meters high, in 2020. India's Supreme Court warned last year that red warning lights will soon have to be put on the dump to alert passing jets. It was not meant to be that way. Ghazipur was opened in 1984 and reached its capacity in 2002 when it should have been closed. But the city's detritus has kept on arriving each day in hundreds of trucks. A Delhi municipal official said on condition of anonymity, about 2,000 tons of garbage is dumped at Ghazipur each day. In 2018, a section of the hill collapsed in heavy rains, killing 2 people. Dumping was banned after the deaths, but the measure lasted only a few days because authorities could not find an alternative. Fires sparked by methane gas coming from the dump regularly break out and take days to extinguish. Jambhavi Jukla, senior researcher at the Center for Science and Environment in New Delhi, said methane belching from the garbage can become even more deadly when mixed with atmosphere. Leachate, a black toxic liquid, oozes from the dump into a local canal. Chitra Mukherjee, head of Chintan, an environmental advocacy group, said it all needs to be stopped as the continuous dumping had severely polluted the air and groundwater.
You can imagine it's just a depression in which we are putting waste. So what happens to all that waste? What happens to the toxic leachate? Leachate is a toxic soup which comes out from waste. All this enters our groundwater. It pollutes our air. It pollutes the land.
Residents say the dump often makes breathing virtually impossible.
मैं सिर्फ ये घर अपने बच्चों की वजह से छोड़ के जाना चाहता हूँ क्योंकि मेरे घर में 2 बच्चे हैं, एक की उम्र 8 साल है, एक की उम्र 4 साल है और दोनों बच्चों को पॉल्यूशन की वजह से उनको बार-बार बुखार आता है.
Protests do not work and now many people are leaving the district. They say a plant that recycles waste into energy next to the dump increases their misery because the smoke it releases by burning trash is also poisonous. Local Dr. Kumit Gupta said she sees about 70 people, including babies, each day, mostly suffering from respiratory and stomach ailments caused by polluted air. A recent study said the dump was a health risk for people living within 3 miles, including for cancer. Traffic clogged streets, heavy industry, and annual burning of fields in regions around Delhi have already made the Indian capital notorious for its pollution. A government survey conducted between 2013 and 2017 reported that Delhi saw 981 deaths from acute respiratory infection, while more than 1.7 million residents suffered from infections. And India's garbage mountains will only get bigger in coming years. According to government figures, Indian cities are among the world's largest garbage producers, generating 62 million tons of waste annually. By 2030, that could rise to 165 million tons. Chitra of the Chintan Group said waste has become a huge challenge as India's growing wealth drives consumerism as the production of extra garbage that the country cannot dispose of properly. When he took power in 2014, Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched Operation Clean India, under which tens of thousands of public toilets have been built and new waste management rules were introduced in 2016. But watchdogs, including the Supreme Court, have repeatedly accused Delhi's warring authorities. The region is controlled by one party, while Modi's right-wing party runs the city authorities, of not taking the waste crisis seriously. Coming up, John Kerry says countries are not doing enough on climate change. The World Organization for Animal Health says the African swine fever is an endemic disease. Rural Afghans bear the brutal cost of the endless war. The Zambian president encouraged health drive by taking up jogging. Eagle News Washington, D.C. will be right back, so stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching Eagle News Washington, D.C. At the 2019 Berlin Climate and Security Conference, John Kerry has warned that no country in the world is getting the job done. He also took aim at U.S. President Donald Trump for boosting the coal industry at a time when the rest of the world is moving away from it.
Fascism raises its ugly head in countries that we thought had learned the bitter lessons of war, certainly in the last century. A world that gathered in Paris to summon a global response to the challenge of climate change finds itself settling for far less than was promised or than is urgently needed. No country in the world, despite all the best intentions by most, is getting the job done. In the United States of America today, the fastest growing job is not the coal industry that Donald Trump keeps insisting on trying to boost at a time when the rest of the world is moving away from it. The fastest growing job in the United States is solar power technician. The second fastest job is wind power technician. So even in our country, the marketplace is saying something different from the demagogues.
10 of Hamasha Gul's children and grandchildren were walking to school last year when they came across an unexploded rocket, a common sight in Afghanistan where heavy fighting continues between the Taliban and national security forces. Not realizing what it was and the danger it posed, the curious kids picked up the weapon and took it to show an older relative. More than 1 year later, the surviving children are struggling to adopt their new reality. 10-year-old Rabia, who lost her right leg in the blast, said she feels very sad when she sees other girls walk towards school and she cannot walk like them. Rabia said she was happy when she had legs, but after losing one of them, happiness eludes her. Like her relatives, Rabia has been fitted with a simple prosthetic and is learning to walk again. She sits on a bench outside her house as 6 other amputee family members, ranging in age from 6 to 15, place stockings over their stumps and wriggle into their prosthetics. For the most part, the children are tutored at home, but sometimes make their way into school for exams, a painful journey owing to blisters that develop where the artificial limbs rub against skin. Gul, the family elder, says Afghanistan's war, now in its 18th year, has made life bitter for him and his loved ones. He said, quote, "We cannot afford to leave this area and live in another house. All we have here is this house. That's all." Years of conflict have left Afghanistan strewn with landmines, unexploded mortars, rockets, and homemade bombs. According to the United Nations, 3,804 civilians, including more than 900 children, were killed in Afghanistan in 2018, with another 7,000 wounded. It was the deadliest year to date for civilians in Afghanistan's conflict. 15-year-old Shafiqullah, who lost both his legs, hopes the Taliban comes and makes peace with the Afghan government and security will be better in Afghanistan so that no one gets killed or wounded in this country. The surviving children are Shafiqullah, 15, twins Abdul and Bashir Rashid, 12, Mongol, 11, Aman, 7, Rabia, 10, Marwa, 6. Matthew Stone, World Organization for Animal Health, or OIE's Deputy General Director, says the African swine fever in China and Vietnam risk becoming endemic in some areas in the world, in Europe especially. He warns all countries need to heighten their border biosecurity.
Understand is that right at the moment we have a very heightened risk around African swine fever. Now, whether that translates into additional spread to other countries really depends on how our member countries react to that biosecurity risk. In parts of Eastern Europe and even moving into parts of the European Union, we have a virus that's becoming endemic in either wild pig populations in new places or becoming entrenched into parts of the pork industry where there is low biosecurity. So is that all countries need to heighten their border biosecurity. All countries need to think carefully about their supply chains and the biosecurity risk management on it. And all producers need to think carefully and implement strong biosecurity measures around their production facilities. That we have a very dense, high population, lots of pigs in this region of the world. And we have market chains that are highly interconnected. We've got movement patterns of pigs between farms, a marketing system that sees live pigs moved under relatively low biosecurity conditions. And all of that is signalling that across the supply chains in China and Vietnam, there needs to be a reaction. There's no vaccine for this virus yet. So we're completely dependent on stamping out provisions. That means depopulation on infected farms. And it's very important that humane processes for killing animals and safe and secure, biosecure methods of disposal and decontamination on those premises occurs, so that we don't see environmental contamination. Well, what we're seeing is really quite significant distortion of international markets around pork, and that's creating a lot of uncertainty. And because of the interconnectedness of the global market around meat at the current time, that it's not just the pork market that's being affected here. There's this uncertainty creates impacts for other red meat and protein markets, animal protein markets, but it's even having impacts on markets of plant products associated with animal feeds, for instance, soybean markets.
Zambian President Edgar Chagwa Lungu goes for a jog with some health-conscious citizens in the city of Ndula. The president has incorporated a morning jog into his routine to encourage Zambians to maintain a healthy lifestyle.
It is very, very good. If it can be happening in each province, every month in each province, it will open up so that the district can also be having theirs.
Participants of the health initiative have hopes of actually improving their personal well-being, especially under high-pressure work environment.
We are trying to reduce these non-communicable diseases, and I'm hypertensive. So I know that when I continue like this, I'll be fit, and then I'll reduce my visits to the hospital.
It's necessary for personal health, for a president like him and all of us who work with him in high-pressure office. You can see the benefit. It helps to relieve the pressure and gets you to a better, fresh morning when you have done this than when you haven't done it.
When we come back, celebration of the first Filipino Heritage Month in Canada. Eagle News Washington, D.C. will return shortly. This is Eagle News Washington, D.C. I am Sarah Nackman. Pinoys and those of Filipino descent celebrated the first Filipino Heritage Month in Canada. Individuals, groups, and organizations were recognized for their contribution to the welfare of the community, one of which is the Church of Christ because of its humanitarian efforts through the Aid to Humanity outreach. Maria Ravallo and Rex Adam with the details.
The month of June is historically important to all Filipinos all over the world because it was on June 12, 1898 when Filipinos declared independence from Spain.
It is indeed a good day to celebrate democracy, freedom, and culture for Filipino Canadians all across the country, especially today in Ontario, Canada.
Gathered here in Albert Campbell Square, City of Scarborough, part of Greater Toronto Area, Filipinos and Canadians of Filipino ancestry celebrate
the first Filipino Heritage Month in Canada.
On March 15, 2019, the government officially announced today's inaugural event in celebration of Parliament's unanimous passage of Bill 185 of 2017, an act designating June of every year starting 2019 as Filipino Heritage Month throughout Canada. Salma Zahid, Member of Parliament for Scarborough Centre, expanded the bill from the local to the national level through her Motion 155 that passed the House of Commons on October 30th, 2018.
It has been long overdue to recognize the contributions of all the Canadians of Filipino heritage. They, in all walks of life, they are contributing to the great, rich cultural diversity of Canada we have all called home, whether it is doctors, nurses, caregivers, business people, entrepreneurs, teachers, politicians. Filipino community has always been there, and it is a great honor for me to sponsor Motion 155, which was passed unanimously in the House of Commons on October 30th, and it was a great day to stand up to recognize Philippine Heritage Month from coast to coast to coast.
The significant milestone recognizes the extraordinary contributions to the conservation and promotion of Filipino heritage. As Filipinos or Canadians of Filipino ancestry, they all feel proud that their community is being recognized in the high levels of government due to their distinct contributions in making Canada the great multicultural country.
Today, the Ontario province is home to approximately 340,000 Filipino Canadians, making this province the biggest Filipino community in Canada.
It's not only about being here to celebrate the culture, the heritage, the food, the music. It's about entrepreneurialism. It's about the belief that Filipinos can come to Canada, can build a better life, to do what many other immigrants have done. And this is a country that is built on immigration. You know, my family came here from Italy after the Second World War, and that legacy carries on now. We see Filipinos coming in record numbers. The largest diaspora community right now in Canada is the Filipino community.
Part of the celebration is the recognition of individuals, groups, and organizations that contributed to the progress and diversity of the Canadian landscape and its culture. One of the recipients is the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ through its FYM Foundation Incorporation.
Today, on the celebration of the first National Filipino Heritage Month, on behalf of the Filipino Canadians, we take great pride in your significant and huge contribution to the welfare of people you have reached out to and helped. Mabuhay! Salamat po!
The group receives an exemplary recognition for its meritorious contributions to their aid to humanity projects in Canada. Over the years, their humanitarian efforts have set its sights in a global campaign against poverty. They have conducted outreach programs helping the needy in the communities, regardless of age, gender, nationality, religious, and political affiliation.
The Church of Christ, with the Felix Y. Manalo Foundation, will continue to do good to those who are in need. And it's not just here in Canada, although we may have cited examples earlier, but the aid for humanity, or when we give aid to our fellow men who are in need, it is done throughout the world.
Aside from the Filipino community, the celebration has also been attended by dignitaries, government officials from all levels and agencies, diplomatic corps, sponsors, counselors, volunteers, and community leaders.
We treasure this because it's the first. It's historical, and I'm so happy you guys are here. You are part of our history.
One of the highlights of today's program is the presentation of Philippine cultural heritage, showcasing the vibrant Filipino local talents as they perform musical variety shows. The presence of famous Jollibee, the Filipino multinational fast food chain brand, takes a spot in entertaining the audience.
The activities include Filipino game show, band festivals, and a live concert performance featuring Philippine music icon Florante, complement the euphoria of this historical occasion.
I am very, very proud as a Filipino Canadian because I was born and raised in Canada,
And for me, celebrations like these are very close to my heart because growing up, I was always listening and singing Tagalog songs, and because of that, natuto akong mag-Tagalog, and now I can be proud of that.
It's truly a memorable way of celebrating and honoring individuals, groups, and organizations for their efforts and success in making Filipinos visible in this country.
It is evident that the Filipino community have contributed to all aspects of Ontario's prosperity and diverse heritage for generations. For Eagle News Service, reporting from Toronto, this is Maria Revelo
and Rex Adam,
your Canada Bureau.
Thank you, Maria and Rex. That is today's Eagle News Washington, D.C. Join us again tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our websites at eaglenews.ph, eaglenews.net, and eaglenewsalive.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/EagleNewsPH. On behalf of Eagle News Washington, D.C., thank you for watching. I am Sarah Nachman, and I am 1 with 25.